If you have listened to typical Christian messages or sermons over the years, you've probably heard some form of rebuke against selfish prayers. People will typically say things like, "You know, God isn't a genie," or "God's not here to satisfy you. He is Lord and He is Master." Now, immediately I must say that it is true that God is indeed Lord and Master. Absolutely He is. However, are we truly so ready to accept the idea that God is not the one who satisfies us in every sense of the word? If God is not the one who satisfies us, then who is? Where should we look? If God is not the one who gives to us our needs, our wants, and even our desires, then who or what is left? Do we believe that He wants us to be left unfulfilled and unsatisfied? Is that how a loving Father would treat His beloved children? Well, today we're going to answer these questions in the most simple way possible, by looking at Jesus, of course. Welcome to Thriving Branch. I'm Jim. Today we are looking at selfish prayers. And we're looking at it from the perspective of, does God actually satisfy us? Is He actually the one who satisfies our wants and our needs and our desires? Because these are honest questions that more people have in their heart than might be willing to admit. But it's okay to ask the questions. It's okay to admit you have the questions. Because if we don't admit that we have the questions, we'll never find the answers. And it's important to see the answers. In fact, the scriptures want us to see the answers. God put these answers in the scriptures because He wants us to know. And I asked a few questions in the opening of this study today that are honestly a bit provocative. Those questions, along with the very title of this study today, are provocative deliberately. I want to highlight this particular issue and encourage us to honestly take a step back away from typical religious thinking, and I want us to truly think about these issues in the light of Jesus Christ. Not merely what our religious dogma and our pet theologies have conditioned us to believe, but to actually think about these things, to study these things, to look at these things in the light of Jesus Christ. And I think a lot of times our religious dogma, our pet theologies, our man-made traditions and ideas get in the way. And I'm concerned that that happens far too often in modern Christian culture. So let's deal with the underlying issues first and build up a solid foundation on Jesus Christ. And the first question that we must address is, does God actually satisfy us? Is that even something He's concerned about? Because the opposition often attacks this very point vehemently, stating that we shouldn't think of God as satisfying us, and that we shouldn't be so worldly minded, they say. I mean, there are hundreds of spins that you can put on this. And the words used might be a little different from one Christian community to another, but the underlying core argument is the same. So let's cut through the forest of man-made theology and see what God Himself says about this. Does he satisfy us? Let's look at a few scriptures to find out. And first on our list are probably a couple of familiar verses if you remember our studies on Psalms 91. And by the way, if you have not seen those, I will put a link right up here in the description for you, in the video rather. I'll put it in the description and the video. Doesn't really matter. But Psalms 91, verses 15 and 16. Psalms chapter 91, verses 15 and 16. Let's read these together. It's important for us to see this. Ready? 1, 2, read. He shall call on me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. With long life will I satisfy him and show him my salvation. So right here in this first verse, we can plainly see that our satisfaction is not only the desire of God, it's not only something that he does and wants to do, but it's actually a promise. And it's tied together with Jesus Christ. The word for salvation here is actually Yeshua. Jesus is in fact the ultimate satisfier and ultimate satisfaction. Don't shy away, my friend, from admitting this. Don't shy away from admitting this, because it does not belittle God or his majesty to think of him as the one who satisfies us. In fact, it actually magnifies him, and it actually magnifies and gives glory to what Jesus actually came to do. If you're having some trouble putting that together, let's look at a few more verses regarding what God says about this so that we can see it more clearly, we can understand it better. Consider Psalms chapter 22, verse 26. Psalms chapter 22, verse 26. Let's read this together. Ready? 1, 2, read. The meek shall eat and be satisfied. They shall praise the Lord and seek him. Your heart shall live forever. Now, do you see what this is saying here? At this time, it should be noted that the Hebrew word for satisfy actually does mean exactly that. It means to be satisfied, to be satiated, to be fulfilled. We aren't playing fast and loose with the definition here. And God means every word of it. And I want you to notice that here the verse says, they, the meek, shall eat and be satisfied. What do you think that this is referring to, my friend? What shall they eat and be satisfied with? Well, Jesus himself answers this question for us in John chapter 6, verse 35. John chapter 6, verse 35. Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He that comes to me shall never hunger, and he that believes on me shall never thirst. Jesus himself is our bread of life. He is our satisfaction and the one who satisfies us. He says it plainly right here. Whoever comes to him shall never hunger. Whoever believes on him shall never thirst. That's not a maybe. That's not a sometimes you'll be hungry and sometimes you won't. Sometimes you'll be thirsty and sometimes you won't. No, this is absolute never. He that comes to me shall never hunger. Whoever believes on him shall never thirst. You will never be hungry or thirsty when you come to Jesus and believe on him. Stop and meditate on that for a minute. Pause the video if you have to. Just think about this for a minute. Whoever comes to him will never be hungry. Whoever believes on him shall never be thirsty. So now that we've heard multiple testimonies from God's own mouth regarding the fact that he does indeed satisfy us, let's now address the main point of today's study. What about these so-called selfish prayers? What's the deal with that? First, we have to define what a selfish prayer actually is. The word selfish, typically in our English language, means with self-interest, concerned with yourself, seeking your own desires. Can we all agree that that's the definition, the main definition of selfish? That's what people mean when they say selfish prayers, to be concerned with yourself. So what's the deal with a selfish prayer? Are selfish prayers wrong? Many people would immediately say yes to that question without even hesitating, without even giving it a second thought, even a first thought for that matter. However, we are only interested in God's opinion, right? We're not interested in the opinions of man. We're interested in God's opinion. So as promised, let's go straight to Jesus Christ. How did Jesus react when selfish requests were made of him? When people came to Jesus with selfish requests that were concerned with their own self-interest, their own desires, how did Jesus react? Let me ask you, have you ever stopped to consider that question? Or have we been so consumed and pre-programmed with man's theologies that we never even stopped to look at Jesus up until this point? That should probably highlight something right there. Let's look at what Jesus did. How did he react when people came to him? Did he rebuke the person making the selfish request? Did he send them away without satisfying their desire? Let's take a look. Starting with Luke chapter 18, verses 35 through 43. Luke chapter 18, verses 35 through 43. Let's read this together. Ready? 1, 2, read. And it came to pass that as he was come near to Jericho, a certain blind man sat by the wayside begging. And hearing the multitude pass by, he asked what it meant. And they told him that Jesus of Nazareth was passing by. And he cried, saying, Jesus, you son of David, have mercy on me. And they which went before rebuked him, that he should hold his peace. But he cried so much the more, You son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stood and commanded him to be brought to him. And when he was come near, he asked him, saying, What will you that I should do to you? And he said, Lord, that I may receive my sight. And Jesus said to him, Receive your sight. Your faith has saved you. And immediately he received his sight and followed him, glorifying God. And all the people, when they saw it, gave praise to God. So what do we have here? Here we have a record of Jesus healing a blind man. Most people don't think much more of this beyond the obvious. Yet, as we examine this, particularly verse 41, we see that Jesus gives this man an opportunity that many of us would want. He gives this man an opportunity to ask of him anything. He says, What is it that you will that I should do to you? That's a very open question. That is a question that Jesus asked this man that many people today would say is blasphemy. God isn't here to serve your desires. God isn't a genie. God isn't just going to do whatever you ask of him. Well, is that what Jesus demonstrated here? Look at the question. What is it that you will that I should do to you? He didn't give any prerequisites. That's a very open-ended question. What do you want? Jesus asked the man plainly, what do you will that I should do to you? The man could have asked for anything. The man could have said, feed the poor, stop wars, cure all the lepers. This man knew who Jesus was. At least he knew that he could do miraculous things. He calls them the Son of David. So Jesus gives this man an amazing opportunity. He could have asked for anything. End world hunger. Anything. He could have asked for anything. With this amazing opportunity in front of him, what does this man ask for? Lord, that I may receive my sight. Make no mistake here, my friend. That's the very definition of a selfish prayer. It is entirely focused on this man's self-interest, his own desire, his own want. The man wanted his blindness gone. He was concerned about himself. How did Jesus respond to that? In verse 42, we clearly see that Jesus rebuked the man for being so selfish, didn't he? Jesus turned a deaf ear to the man's selfish prayer and sent the man away still blind. Oh wait, Jesus didn't do that. Jesus didn't react the way typical religion would suggest. Instead, Jesus gave the man exactly what he asked for. And the whole thing turned into a praise session, a praise report, a complete worship session as people saw another person being released from the bondage of the enemy. You see, even a selfish prayer gives God glory. Even a selfish request ends up giving God glory. It still allows God to be God. And before you think that I cherry-picked one single example, that I've somehow twisted, there are many examples of what are clearly selfish and self-oriented prayers in the Scriptures, all of which God granted. You don't believe me? David repeatedly prays for himself throughout the Psalms, for all kinds of things, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. He prays for protection from his enemies, for justice to be done upon them, and that he would not be disgraced or humiliated by them in Psalms 35. David also prays for mental, emotional, and spiritual support and healing in Psalm chapter 51. Those are just a few examples from the Psalm. The prayer of Jabez recorded in 1 Chronicles chapter 4, verse 10, covers everything as well. Jabez called on the God of Israel, saying, "Oh, that you would bless me indeed, enlarge my coast, that your hand might be with me, that you would keep me from evil, that it may not grieve me." And God granted him that which he requested. We see requests for self-prosperity of every kind, physical, mental, spiritual, and we see that God granted the prayer without any rebuke, without any fuss. The point of all of this is that we should always guard against allowing man's religion and the way that seems right. We should always guard against that, against putting God in a theological box, if you will, end up robbing us from his incredible generosity. God is greater and more generous and more willing to help than we often give him credit for. Jesus paid for all things to be freely given to us, along with him. In Romans chapter 8, verse 32, yet we are so quick to refuse his gifts because we're afraid of being selfish. But I will leave you today with this one final thought. There are a great number of people recorded in the scriptures who would have never received their miracle if they didn't dare to be selfish. If they didn't dare to push through crowds, for example, and yell and scream to get Jesus' attention as he was passing by them, and then ask for what they desired when questioned. How many of us today, if Jesus came to us and said, "What do you will that I should do for you?" we would be too afraid of being selfish, and we would put on a false humility and not ask for what we really want. Many of us would miss out if asked the same question that Jesus asked the blind man. Would Jesus find the same boldness that these people in scriptures demonstrated in his children today? Probably not. And that's sad. I point this out today not to make you feel guilty, not to condemn you, but to encourage you to not be afraid to come boldly to the throne of grace in Christ and find the help that you truly seek, according to Hebrews chapter 4, verse 16. Jesus has his arms open, waiting for you to ask him for what you want. Don't be afraid. Don't be hypocritical. Don't put on a false mask of humility that he sees through anyway. Ask him what you really want. You might be surprised how generous he really is. Be blessed, my friend.